Alexander Bennett owned a $60 million restaurant empire, but had never actually stepped foot in his establishments without prior notice. For years, he managed everything from spreadsheets on the 30th floor, never speaking directly to waiters or chefs. Then one November night, exhausted from endless meetings, he disguised himself as a regular customer and walked into the Crown Room, his most exclusive Manhattan restaurant where dinner for two costs more than an average salary. What he saw behind the bar stopped him cold. A young waitress was crying silently while serving $3,000 champagne to clients who didn't even notice her existence. Claire Martinez, 24 years old, had red eyes and trembling hands, but she kept working with a dignity that pierced Alexander's heart. When he discovered why she was crying, working 6 days a week in a toxic environment to pay for her grandmother's cancer treatments, and what was really happening in his pristine restaurant, his life as a millionaire but distant CEO shattered. This is the story of how one woman's silent tears opened a CEO's eyes to the hidden suffering in his golden empire and transformed not just his business, but his soul. Stay watching. This changes everything you think about success. What city are you watching this video from and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Alexander Bennett had never stepped foot in his restaurants without prior notice. At 42 years old, the culinary empire he had built was worth $60 million, but he knew his establishments only through reports and balance sheets. That November night, tired of endless meetings, he decided to enter the Crown Room incognito, his most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. What he found left him speechless. Behind the bar, a young waitress was crying silently while serving $3,000 champagne to clients who didn't even notice her. Claire Martinez, 24 years old, had red eyes and trembling hands, but she kept working with a dignity that hit Alexander straight in the heart. When he discovered why this girl was crying and what was really happening in his most prestigious restaurant, his life as a millionaire, but distant CEO would be shattered by a revelation that would forever change his way of seeing the world of work and humanity. Alexander Bennett contemplated the quarterly balance sheet numbers from the 30th floor of the Bennett Group skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan. $60 million in revenue, 15 luxury restaurants throughout the United States, 2,000 employees. On paper, everything worked perfectly, but that afternoon, watching the rain against his office windows, he felt more distant than ever from the reality of his company. At 42, he had built his empire starting from zero. Son of a small restaurant owner from New Orleans, he had studied business at Harvard and transformed the family diner into a chain of exclusive establishments frequented by celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. The Crown Room in Manhattan was his most prestigious creation, a Michelin-starred restaurant in the Upper East Side, where a dinner for two could cost more than an average salary. Success had a price. Alexander didn't remember the last time he had directly spoken with a waiter, a chef, or a sommelier. His day consisted of meetings with general directors, video conferences with investors, decisions made in Excel spreadsheets, never seeing the people behind those numbers. That afternoon, after another meeting about expansion strategies, Alexander felt an inexplicable tightness in his chest. Instead of returning to his mansion in Greenwich, he decided to do something unprecedented. Enter one of his restaurants without notice, dressed as a normal client. He changed his $2,000 suit for a more modest one, took off his Patek Philippe watch, and headed toward the Crown Room. He wanted to see with his own eyes how the establishment that represented his brand's excellence really worked. The restaurant was splendid from outside. Dim lights, elegant windows, exclusive atmosphere. Alexander entered posing as a client, observing every detail with eyes different from those of the owner. That's when he saw her behind the bar. A girl about 24 years old was serving Dom Perignon champagne to a couple of clients. She had brown hair pulled back in a perfect bun, the establishment's impeccable uniform, and moved with professional grace among bottles that cost more than her monthly salary. But something wasn't right. Alexander immediately noticed the girl had red and moist eyes, as if she were holding back tears. Her hands trembled slightly while serving the champagne, and occasionally she would turn to discreetly wipe her eyes. The clients didn't seem to notice anything. They laughed, toasted, talked about business and expensive vacations. But Alexander, who had learned to read people in years of business, clearly saw that this girl was suffering. He approached the bar and ordered a Negroni, observing her closely. Her name tag read Claire. She was beautiful in a natural way, without excessive makeup or arrogant attitudes. There was something authentic about her, a fragility that contrasted with the golden environment surrounding her. While Claire prepared the cocktail with trembling hands, Alexander overheard a conversation at the next table. Two suited men talked about her in derogatory tones, commenting that she seemed about to cry and defining waitresses as mere decorations. Alexander felt his blood boil. These were exactly the type of clients who frequented his restaurants. Rich, arrogant, who treated staff like objects. But he had never really thought about what it must be like to work for people like that every night. Claire brought him the Negroni with a professional smile that couldn't hide the sadness. Alexander thanked her kindly and noticed she seemed surprised by the courtesy. Evidently, she wasn't used to clients who treated her like a person. Alexander remained at the bar for an hour observing. What he saw shocked him. Claire was treated like an object by most clients. Shouted orders, constant criticism, sexist comments, and yet she kept smiling, serving, maintaining the composure the establishment demanded. When he finally decided to leave, Alexander knew he would never be the same. He had seen the hidden side of his golden empire. Real people with real problems who worked hard to maintain the illusion of luxury for clients who often didn't even deserve their service. Returning home, a single question hammered in his head. What was happening to Claire? And above all, how many others like her worked in his restaurants without him realizing it? Alexander couldn't sleep that night. The image of Claire crying silently while serving champagne to indifferent clients wouldn't leave him. The next morning, instead of going directly to the office, he decided to personally investigate the lives of his employees. He called the general manager of the Crown Room, Marcus Fisher, a 50-year-old man who had managed the establishment with an iron fist for 5 years. Alexander didn't reveal he had been at the restaurant, but asked for information about the staff, discreetly focusing on Claire. Fisher spoke of her in bureaucratic terms. She was a good employee, punctual, professional. She had started 2 years ago as a table waitress, then had been promoted to the bar for her suggestion. A human resource like so many others, but Alexander wanted to know more. That night he returned to the Crown Room, observing Claire with even more attention. He noticed details that had escaped him the night before. A small scar on her left hand, comfortable but worn shoes under the elegant uniform, worried glances toward the clock. During the break, Alexander saw her go out to the back patio for a phone call. Driven by an inexplicable curiosity, he followed her discreetly. What he heard broke his heart. Claire was talking to someone in a worried and affectionate tone, reassuring a grandmother about medicines taken and medical checkups. She promised visits on her day off. She lied, saying she worked in a beautiful place with kind people so as not to worry the elderly lady. Her voice broke when she talked about necessary treatments, assuring that the money was available. When she came back in, Claire had quickly recomposed herself, putting back on the professional smile like a mask. But Alexander now knew what was hidden. A 24-year-old girl who worked in a hostile environment to pay for her grandmother's medical treatments. In the following days, Alexander conducted a discreet investigation. Using private contacts, he discovered Claire Martinez's story. Born in Boston, she had lost her parents in a car accident at 18. Since then, she had lived with her 80-year-old grandmother, Hope, her only remaining family. 6 months earlier, her grandmother had received a cancer diagnosis. The treatments were expensive, and insurance covered only part of the costs. Claire had left the university where she was studying literature and had moved to New York to find a job that paid enough to support the therapies. The Crown Room was the best-paying job she had managed to find, but the hours were exhausting and the environment toxic. She worked 6 days a week, often until late hours, enduring rude clients and competitive colleagues, all to earn enough to pay for chemotherapies and medicines that cost thousands of dollars a month. Alexander also discovered something else. Marcus Fisher had a bad reputation among female staff. He used his power to harass waitresses, threatening dismissal to anyone who rebelled. Claire was one of his main victims, but she couldn't afford to lose the job. The night Alexander had seen her crying, she had just learned that her grandmother's treatments weren't working as expected. She needed more expensive therapies at a private clinic, But her salary, even though it was the best she had been able to get, wasn't enough. This revelation hit Alexander like a punch. His chain of luxury restaurants, which he considered a symbol of excellence, hid stories of exploitation and suffering. Employees who worked in difficult conditions for insufficient salaries under the supervision of unscrupulous managers. But above all, there was Claire, an intelligent and sensitive girl who had sacrificed dreams and youth for love toward the only family she had left. And she did it with a dignity that shamed all the rich and pampered clients who frequented his establishments. Alexander understood he could no longer limit himself to observing. He had to act. But how to help Claire without revealing his identity, and without creating problems for her with Fisher? The answer came when the next night he saw Fisher approach Claire with the predatory expression he had learned to recognize. It was time to intervene. Alexander arrived at the Crown Room that night with a precise plan. He had decided the time had come to intervene directly. He could no longer limit himself to observing while Claire suffered before everyone's eyes. The restaurant was particularly full. Manhattan's exclusive clientele created that golden atmosphere Alexander had always considered a success. But now, seeing everything through the eyes of someone who had to endure these clients every night, the scene seemed different to him. Claire was at the bar, elegant and professional as always. But Alexander noticed every sign of stress. How she bit her lip when ignored, the startle when someone raised their voice, the sadness in moments of pause. Marcus Fisher prowled around the establishment with his usual arrogance. Alexander had always considered him efficient, but now he saw what he really was, a man who abused power to intimidate vulnerable employees. Around 10 p.m., Alexander saw Fisher approach Claire. The girl was organizing bottles when he positioned himself beside her too close. Alexander could clearly see the scene. Fisher whispering in Claire's ear, she stiffening trying to move away, he restraining her. Claire's face was a mask of disgust and fear. Alexander decided to break his incognito. He got up and approached the bar with determined steps. His voice cut through the air with an authority that made both turn suddenly. Fisher paled, recognizing Alexander Bennett. He had received no notice of the visit, and above all, he had been caught in a compromising situation. Alexander looked at him with glacial coldness. Then he addressed Claire with a gentle and respectful tone. He asked her to follow him to the director's office. She nodded, confused and worried, recognizing the Bennett surname. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. In the upstairs office, Alexander had Claire sit down, immediately reassuring her. She had no problems. On the contrary, it was he who owed her an apology. He told her everything. The night spent incognito observing her, the investigations about her story, the discovery of Fisher's harassment, the situation with the sick grandmother. Claire listened incredulously, alternating shame with relief. Alexander confessed that she had opened his eyes to what was really happening in his restaurants. He had built his empire thinking only about numbers, without seeing the people who made it all possible. She had taught him that true success is measured in how you treat the people who work for the company. The solution he proposed was radical. Immediate dismissal of Fisher. Promotion and raise for Claire. Treatments paid for grandmother at the best private clinic. When Claire protested, Alexander was inflexible. It wasn't charity, but justice. For the first time since he had known her, Claire smiled for real. A smile full of relief and gratitude. It was the beginning of a transformation that would change everything. In the days following Marcus Fisher's dismissal, Alexander initiated a true revolution in how he managed his restaurants, with Claire as his most valuable consultant. The first thing he did was install his temporary office directly at the Crown Room, the 30th floor of the Bennett Group skyscraper remained empty while the most important CEO in American dining worked from a restaurant back room. Claire revealed herself as a natural manager. She knew every dynamic of the establishment, every staff problem, every detail that escaped official reports. She had lived the employees' difficulties and knew what needed to change. The first changes were immediate. More humane work schedules after discovering many waiters worked 12 hours without adequate breaks. a 30% raise for all salaries that weren't enough even for a studio apartment rent in New York. Introduction of meetings where each employee could speak freely. The real revolution was cultural. From Claire's idea, Alexander created small, elegant plaques for each employee, where next to the name, something personal was written. Louis studies medicine in the evenings. Maria has 2 children and paints on weekends. The results were surprising. Clients began to interact differently with staff, showing interest in the people serving them. The atmosphere became warmer, more human. Claire observed these changes with amazement. Her grandmother now received the best treatments and was responding well to therapies, while the entire work environment transformed. One night, while closing together, Alexander confessed that managing a company looking only at numbers is incomplete. You need both strategy and humanity. Claire responded that she had discovered some bosses know how to recognize their mistakes and have the courage to change them. Alexander understood that Claire had become the person who had saved his business soul, showing him that you can succeed while remaining human. 3 months after the Crown Room's transformation, the results were surprising in ways Alexander had never imagined. Not only had the restaurant's atmosphere completely changed, but the numbers were also significantly improving. Staff turnover had dropped 70%. Customer satisfaction was at historic highs, and a united team had been created that worked with true passion. Alexander had extended the revolution to the other chain restaurants as well, but the Crown Room remained the main laboratory where new ideas were experimented with. And at the center of everything was always Claire, who had revealed herself not only as an excellent manager, but also as an inexhaustible source of innovative ideas. One of these ideas had particularly impacted Alexander. Claire had proposed creating special evenings dedicated to staff stories. Once a month, some employees would tell their story to clients, creating a moment of authentic connection that went beyond simple restaurant service. The first evening of this type had seen Claire herself tell her story. With an emotional but firm voice, she had talked about her grandmother, the sacrifice of leaving university, the dreams postponed for love. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, and many clients approached at the end of the evening to personally thank her. Alexander, hidden at the back of the room, had felt a pride he hadn't experienced in years. Not the cold pride of financial success, but the warm one of having contributed to creating something beautiful and meaningful. In the following months, Claire and Alexander developed an increasingly close collaboration. She brought field experience and human sensitivity. He brought strategic vision and resources to realize projects. It was a perfect alchemy that was revolutionizing not only the restaurants, but the entire sector. One night, while working together on a new project to improve conditions for part-time employees, Alexander realized something that surprised him. He wasn't only appreciating Claire's professional skills, but was falling in love with the person she was. Intelligent, brave, authentic in an often false and superficial world, Claire, for her part, had seen Alexander transform from the distant and feared CEO into a man who listened, learned, and above all, sincerely cared about the well-being of people who worked for him. It was impossible not to feel attracted to this evolution, to this capacity to change and grow. The moment of truth came during one of those nights when they stayed alone closing the restaurant. They were talking about the company's future when Alexander suddenly changed the subject, asking what she dreamed for her personal future. Claire stopped, her hands on the glasses she was drying. She confessed that lately she had started dreaming again. For a long time, she had only tried to survive, to keep her grandmother alive. But now she felt she could think about the future again, seeing the possibility of continuing to make a difference, of helping other people as he had helped her. Alexander then confessed that what had started as a gesture of justice had transformed into something much deeper. She hadn't only changed his company, she had changed him as a man. He had fallen in love with her. Not with the employee he had helped, but with the extraordinary woman he had come to know. The silence that followed was full of electricity. Claire looked at him with eyes shining with emotion, confessing in turn that she had fallen in love with the man he had chosen to become, the man who had had the courage to change. Their first kiss was sweet and full of promises. It wasn't only love between a man and a woman, but the union of two people who had saved each other, who together had discovered that true success is built by putting humanity at the center of everything. 1 year after that night at the Crown Room, Alexander and Claire were celebrating something no one in the business world would have imagined possible. The first anniversary of the Bennett Revolution, as the specialized press had baptized it. The Bennett Group had become a case study in all American business schools. Profits increased 40%. Employees applying from all over the country to work in their restaurants. Clients making reservations months in advance, not only for the excellent food, but for the unique human experience each establishment offered. But the numbers, however impressive, weren't the most important thing for Alexander. The most important thing sat beside him. Claire, who had become the general manager of all restaurants and, above all, the woman of his life. Their wedding, celebrated 6 months earlier in a simple but emotional ceremony in the garden of the house where they now lived together, had been an event that united employees and clients, creating an extended family that went far beyond business boundaries. Grandmother Hope, completely cured thanks to the best treatments, had been Claire's maid of honor. During the reception, she had told everyone that her granddaughter had not only found love, but had also recovered herself, her dreams, her desire to change the world. Alexander had understood that his life's greatest success wasn't the $60 million in revenue, but the fact of waking up every morning beside a woman who loved him for the man he had become, not for what he possessed. That night, they were inaugurating the 15th chain restaurant in Los Angeles, applying from day one all principles of the Bennett philosophy: fair salaries, humane schedules, respect for every employee, and above all, the conviction that every person working in a company has a story that deserves to be heard and respected. During the inauguration speech, Alexander looked at the room full of journalists, business leaders, and above all, employees from his restaurants who had come from all over the United States. He told how he had started believing success was measured only in numbers, but had discovered, thanks to a brave girl who cried silently while serving champagne, that true success is measured in authentic smiles, in dignity returned, in dreams that become possible again. He turned toward Claire, who looked at him with eyes full of pride, explaining to the public how she had taught him that a company isn't made of structures and balance sheets, but of people, and that when you treat people with respect and love, they return dedication and passion that no business consultant could ever teach. After the ceremony, while guests celebrated in the new restaurant, Alexander and Claire found a moment alone on the terrace overlooking the Hollywood sign. Alexander hugged her, reflecting on what they had built together. Not only an empire of restaurants, but a new model of doing business that demonstrated how you can succeed while remaining human. Claire, resting her head on his shoulder, reminded him that he had saved not only her life and her grandmother's, but also his soul. In doing so, they had created something that would change the lives of thousands of people who would come to work for them. Alexander kissed her sweetly, knowing she was right. Their story had started with a waitress's tears in a luxury restaurant, but had become an example of how love for people, for work, for life, can transform anything. Looking at the Los Angeles lights turning on in the evening, Alexander thought about how much his life had changed a year ago. He was a successful but lonely CEO who knew his company only through numbers. Now he was a man in love and fulfilled, who every day worked side by side with the woman he loved to build something beautiful and meaningful. The Bennett Group had become something more than a restaurant chain. It had become a symbol that in the business world you can succeed while remaining human, that profit and compassion can coexist, that sometimes all it takes is the courage to look in the eyes of those who work for you to discover that true success isn't measured in dollars, but in lives changed for the better. And it had all started with a waitress who cried silently while serving champagne to indifferent clients. A girl who had taught a millionaire what it really meant to be rich. Like, if you believe true success is measured in lives changed for the better, comment which moment of the story touched your heart the most. Share to inspire those who believe you can succeed while being human. Subscribe for more stories of business leaders who have put love at the center of business. Sometimes all it takes is looking in the eyes of those who work for you to discover what really matters. Sometimes a stranger's tears can save your soul, and sometimes love is born when you least expect it, transforming everything into something greater. Because true power isn't dominating people, but elevating them toward their dreams.